Welcome to another episode of What's Working in E-commerce. I'm your host, Egan Heath from Caravan Digital. We're a digital marketing agency for e-commerce brands. Today we have on a very special guest. His name is Korion Morris. He's from Unybrands, and he has deep expertise in buying and selling e-commerce brands. These guys are a strategic acquirer for e-commerce companies. It sounds like many of them are selling on Amazon. In other cases, they're direct to consumer as well. So Korion, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Egan, thank you so much for having me. Happy Monday.
Yeah, you as well. Tell us a little bit about your background. I think you've been on both sides, both the brand side and the acquirer side. How did you get into this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So, several years back, I was a co-founding employee at a small startup that initially sold into brick and mortar retail. So it's kind of a gift, novelty, souvenir business. Had a really great, phenomenal product that was wildly popular here up in the Pacific Northwest. And we sold into retail. And when I joined, the company is really a part of scaling the brand, building our e-commerce presence. And we did that for a few years. We're able to leverage our intellectual property. So we had four fully issued utility patents, which ultimately was a catalyst for us signing an exclusive licensing agreement and exiting the brand. And so spent some time on the sales side of the fence, but also today I'm the director of growth here at Unybrands, where I really lead the acquisitions funnel for North America. And so now I'm on the buy side. And so it's been a tremendous amount of fun to be on both sides of the fence. I think there's a level of empathy and understanding that I have, having been a seller when I speak to sellers, which has been a great time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Were there some surprises in that process that you weren't expecting?
Yes and no. So I was really fortunate in that I had a few business partners that were incredibly well seasoned. They were veterans. They had been through the whole process of building brands, exiting brands. One had been through an IPO, and so I would say that we were in really great shape as far as positioning our brand for an exit. But there's certainly challenges as far as how do you build intellectual property in the U.S. and then ensure that when you're manufacturing those products in Southeast Asia, that you're protecting the IP that you've developed. And then, as you start to get into bigger and larger accounts, how are you ensuring that, you're driving the kind of margins that, different retailers are looking for, particularly in like the retail space. And then, of course, learning the whole Amazon ecosystem as we went through that as well. So, yes, definitely, maybe not the same challenges that most people face, but definitely some unique challenges with that.
And tell us a little bit, our audience, we have a lot of brand owners, marketers, some consultants and things like that. For people who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about, what is a strategic acquirer and, why should an e-commerce brand owner care about that?
Absolutely. So, at a very high level, if you go and take an MBA course at Harvard Business School, this is essentially it's a roll up, right? So the idea is how do we get very similar kind of assets or brands together, scale those brands, and then have an opportunity to take advantage of kind of economies of scale on the back end. So they're sharing kind of supply chain infrastructure, operational infrastructure, different things like that. For what we're doing, I think it's much more nuanced than that. So, if you take a look back, several years, you've seen kind of the emergence of micro brands, these brands that really are unique. They have a very unique selling proposition. They have a very specific consumer base. And then you look at a platform like Amazon or Shopify, and it's now easier than ever to go out and build a micro brand, to build relationships with those consumers. But the challenge is, each of these brands faces some point where it's almost there's a glass ceiling where it becomes increasingly difficult to scale your brand, whether it's from a capital perspective, whether it's from just an operational perspective, or just a bandwidth perspective. And so really what we're doing is we're coming in and saying, hey, look, you've built this phenomenal brand. You've got an amazing customer. You have an amazing USP. You're excited to see it go to the next level, but maybe you don't have the skills or the resources, or maybe you just don't have the energy to take that to the next level. And so our thesis really is, let's go out, let's find these really phenomenal brands. There's instances where we'll go out, we'll buy the brand, we'll retain the founding team, and we'll free them up to focus on what they're really excited about, what they'd rather spend their time on. And we can do that. Let's grow this thing together. And there's also instances where we'll go out, we'll acquire that brand, we'll allow you to de-risk, maybe you can hang out on the beach, maybe you go do what's next that you're excited about. And then we take that brand and we continue to scale it. But ultimately, the thought is, and it's all built on one, identifying and acquiring really phenomenal brands. And then two, can you effectively scale those brands, which is, a core part of what we spend our time on.
Yeah, that's great. I know you've told me you guys have expertise then in Amazon, supply chain, PPC, brands and strategy and everything like that. And you guys know this space. You can take over and take e-commerce brands to the next level. So that's really awesome. I'm curious, I think some of our listeners, and people watching this are in that micro brand space. Potentially they could sell to someone like like Unybrands someday. If they're still a number of years out, how should they start thinking about that? And how should they start preparing, to make their company attractive to an acquirer like you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first and foremost, the most important thing is to realize it's never too important, never too early to start thinking about an exit. From day one, you can build your business and put pieces into place that are going to make an exit much easier for you in the future. And that's something that, acquirers like us love to see. So, what does that look like? A few examples are, really have a thorough understanding of your P&L, have a great accountant. I think a strong accountant, a strong lawyer really are worth their weight in gold. They're going to make our lives a whole lot easier. And when you look at the process where we go out, we develop an initial view on your business. Let's say we put an LOI out, and then we begin due diligence. That LOI is based off of the financials that you shared with us. And so if those financials aren't accurate, there's a possibility that could possibly change, or we're going to dig into it because we're going to have to go through and rebuild all of that information. And so thinking about it as far as the structure of the organization, how can you build out SOPs? How can you ensure that the handoff is as smooth as possible? And if you can do that from day one, that's going to just make it that much easier for you later on down the road. And to your point earlier around what are some things that we did, what did we learn? That's something that we did incredibly well in our business. Is we had clear SOPs, we had a very clear IP kind of dashboard with all of the important information around that. And so when we enter due diligence, it was a lot easier for our acquirer to go in and understand, okay, everything is in place. And it just frees them up and gives them a little bit more confidence in the transaction. And the other thing I would think about is, think about what type of partner you would like to work with. Do you want to work with a broker? Do you want to work directly with an aggregator? Do you want to work with somebody in the strategic space? And then ultimately, what does that exit look like for you? Do you want to stay involved? Do you want to go out and retire? Do you want to do something else? I think those are all things that you should think about early because it makes it a lot easier when the right time comes.
Yeah, that's really helpful. You've mentioned IP a couple times. I wanted to ask about that. I don't know much about that space, and so, is it patents? Is it other things? What sorts of IP protection should be in place for a brand owner when they're looking to sell?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love it. So, at Unybrands, we're less married to the idea of IP. It's more about, we want to acquire a high quality brand that's defensible. I think IP can play a role in making a brand more defensible. And so what I mean by that is, you've got a utility patent, which is kind of the holy grail of intellectual property, in that, it's going to be, I would say, the strongest type of intellectual property. Like, you can do a design patent; those are kind of easy to get around. But having a utility patent is going to provide much more confidence when we're acquiring a brand. Now, for all products, that's not necessarily relevant. Let's say you have a personal care brand, you're not necessarily going to go out and create, a utility patent for that. But I think the next step down for us is, do you have a proprietary formulation? Is there science? Is there work that you've done where it's not just off the shelf, but it's something that's unique? It's something that makes your product unique and valuable in the market, which makes it that much more unique and valuable to us. But there's other ways to think about making a product really defensible. So we can look at it from, is there a strong review mode? Is there a really strong repeat purchase rates where you have a customer base that they're fanatics for your brand, they love your brand, they're excited about that brand. Ultimately, the thought is, our job is to come in and scale the brand. What we want to try to avoid is we come in, we acquire your brand, and then we start to see increased competition come in, and because it's not a product that's differentiated and because it's heavily commoditized, economically, you're eventually you'll reach a race to the bottom. And so that's ultimately what we'd like to avoid.
Yeah, very interesting. On this show, we often talk about owned growth and things like that. Of, do you have subscriptions? Do you have, a list, whether email or SMS? In terms of marketing channel mix, is that something you guys look at?
Absolutely. So I would say, today we're more focused on Amazon than direct consumer. Historically, we were even more focused on Amazon, and so, but as we transition more into a direct consumer centric kind of acquisition pipeline, absolutely. I think do we own or do you own that relationship with the consumer? I think ultimately is the question, right? So whether that shows up via social media and your follower count and engagement around that, whether it shows up as an email list, and I've seen other kind of creative options, whether it's a pet podcast or different things like that. I think that's absolutely important. Those are all ultimately indicators of what a high quality brand looks like. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, kind of around IP, that's really important, and I think it's incredibly important to focus on when you're building the business is the trademarks for the brand. And so I've had numerous instances where, let's say we've gone out to acquire a U.S. asset, and one core part of our growth strategy is to grow brands internationally. So from day one, Unybrands has built offices, throughout the U.S., but also throughout Europe. And so when we're looking at acquiring a brand and scaling that brand, it's about growing it in the U.S. It's about growing it, in the U.K., growing it in Germany and throughout Europe. Not having intellectual property like a trademark in those other markets makes our job a lot more difficult. And we have to figure out how do you navigate that. And so that's something that, for example, that we've discovered in diligence where, we were really excited about an asset and unfortunately we find out they didn't take care of everything from a trademark perspective. And so then that put us in a position of figuring out, okay, how do we structure this transaction to still make it work?
That's something I was going to ask you. Do you guys have red flags that you watch for? I know you can't give us the whole process here, but just anything where it's like you guys are sort of maybe entering into the LOI period. Maybe it's before, maybe it's after, pre or post. But are there red flags where you guys are just going down the list, going, "Ooh, this is a scary one when we see this"?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think we certainly have qualitative and quantitative metrics that we're always evaluating, and we really pride ourselves in doing a tremendous amount of pre-LOI diligence. And so, for us, what that means is we're always looking at revenue, we're looking at what's the margin profile look like, what's the category kind of as a whole look like, but we also like to look at things like momentum, right? So what's the last quarter of sales look like? What's the last quarter of margin look like? Are we seeing margin compression? How does this look relative to what we saw kind of in 2020 and early 2021 with COVID? I think one of the things that we're constantly on keeping an eye out for is, we refer to it as catching a falling knife, right? If a business is declining, how do you figure out what the bottom is? And sometimes that's difficult. And so we try to avoid that. I think that discipline is really put us in an advantageous position today where, we kind of look back a year ago, we had a lot of capital, the market heated up a lot. And I think, our view is always, let's be incredibly disciplined. Let's always lean into our investment criteria. While we have this capital and we'd love to deploy it, let's make sure we're buying the right assets that fit our portfolio, that we have the expertise and the skill set to scale. And so that's put us in a great position today to continue to do that.
Thank you. One of the things you mentioned also is sometimes the brand owners stay on, sometimes they exit. How should an e-commerce business owner think about that? Are they likely to have to stay on? If so, for how long? What can they expect around that?
Yeah, so really, I think, and this is where it's important for the e-commerce brand founder to think about what do they want, is we really defer to them as far as, how we structure the transaction. I think, let's say it's a new category for us that we don't currently have any brands in, there might be, we might try to incentivize the deal for them to stay on a little bit longer so we can capture that learning so that we can understand. But ultimately, it's about, how do we ensure that you feel really excited and passionate about the exit that we're building for you? So, typically, I would say our typical transaction structure is, let's say you might stay on for 2 months, 60 days or so. And that's really about, helping us integrate the brand into our platform. Really as soon as we've signed the LOI, when we begin our expert calls, as we refer to them internally, we're trying to learn as much as we can. We're spending time with you running the business side by side. We're bringing on our brand managers to understand that. And so, typically our typical due diligence process is enough, but I think, it never hurts to have that expertise and that insight longer rather than later. But kind of suffice it to say, I think it really depends on what the founder is looking for. Typically, again, it can be 60 days, but we're happy to do 30 days in some instances. And then I've had founders that are incredibly excited about the future of their business. They want to partake in the upside of that business, and we're happy to accommodate that as well.
Sounds like that piece of how systematized is the business? Are the SOPs built out? Are things sort of automated and humming without them? I imagine that figures into how long do you need them around too.
It does, and that's where kind of the point around, do we have brands in this category already? Like it's a fundamentally different answer to the question. Let's say if we have 4 or 5 brands in the category already, where we've got a subject matter expert, we have incredible confidence around that, we've demonstrated the ability to grow brands in that category already, versus hey, you're an anchor brand in this category for us. We want to do bolt-ons to your brand. And so in that instance, we might say, hey, we would love for you to stay on board more. And, that's not something that we ask for with no expectation of, compensation on their side. We certainly adjust the structure of the transaction to align so that everybody's in alignment there. If they're helping to continue to grow the business, they can partake in the upside of that. And they're even incentivized to take part in kind of the overall Unybrands upside as well.
A lot of business owners have built great teams, and that's how they got where they are. When they ask you, hey, how are you going to integrate my employees? How do you guys speak about that?
Yeah, I think the short and quick answer is it depends. Again, we have kind of an initial analysis that we go through. That's let's say about 150 to 200 different kind of levers, of which a large part of that is the team. So understanding what expertise have you built out in the team, what's your team's appetite for staying involved. A lot of people that have built great teams and are interested in building out another venture, they want to bring their team with them. And sometimes we're okay with that, sometimes we're not. Again, it depends. Kind of our exposure in that category as a whole. But we have several instances where we've not just retained the founder, but retained their team, and they've become an integral part to Unybrands. We actually just had our first global offsite in Miami last week, and I had an opportunity to meet the founders and the team for some assets that we acquired. And some of the brightest, just most phenomenal people that are truly have become a part of Unybrands, that are contributing to our culture. And it's been so exciting.
I want to ask a little bit about, you guys have focused so heavy on the Amazon side. It sounds like historically, when you want to go more D2C and Shopify, sort of that range, how do you guys think about that, and how do you help brands do that?
Absolutely. So, I think there's kind of 2 sides to that question. So I think the first part is, how do we take our existing brands and move those into D2C and Shopify? And I think, our view, we're really building Unybrands for the long run future. The goal isn't to, build and exit this thing in the short term. It's really about creating long-term value. And so I think as a function of that, we'll have a subset of our existing brands that'll be D2C, and there will probably be even a smaller subset that have an omni-channel approach. So then the question becomes, how do we actually do that operationally? The one thing that we've done incredibly well at is hiring a team that has that expertise and has that knowledge. I think the reason that we haven't necessarily moved into some of those spaces yet is just the importance of being disciplined, the importance of demonstrating an ability to grow on Amazon well, to do that consistently over a prolonged amount of time. And then once there's comfort around that, it's like, okay, let's start to look at other channels. So whether that's Walmart, whether that's Shopify, direct consumer, or ultimately retail. I think the second half of that answer is via acquisition. So, as our criteria continue to expand, as we become increasingly comfortable, we're always looking at, I guess you can almost view it as like an acqui-hire, where, hey, maybe we're going out and acquiring a more D2C centric brand so that we can acquire that muscle and that know-how to do that at a higher level. And so not only are they executing that for this existing brand, but maybe they're coming out and building the SOPs and best practices for the other brands in our portfolio, and then we provide them kind of more muscle and skills to continue to expand that.
Very exciting. I wanted to ask too, how do agencies and consultants fit into what you guys do, whether on the Amazon side or the non-Amazon side?
Yeah, absolutely. So, really from day one, our CEO Ulrich was very adamant about bringing in different agencies. I think you only know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. And so the more kind of smart people that are experts at what they do that you could bring to the table early on, I think the more well-rounded it allowed us to be. And it's just more eyes kind of focused on a certain type of outcome. And so from day one, we've always leveraged consultants, we've leveraged a variety of different agencies, we've gone out and tried a lot of tools. And there's certain instances where we've continued to do that, and there's other instances where we've decided, hey, for us to drive on our goals, it makes the most sense to build this infrastructure internally. And so, what does it look like to do that? But that's absolutely an area that we've spent significant resources, a lot of time and energy.
You mentioned brokers and things like that earlier. How have you guys structured Unybrands to be different, and how does that speak to the sellers you're talking to?
Absolutely. So, I think first and foremost, our founder Ulrich spent over 20 years in investment banking, doing acquisitions primarily in the consumer space, and he acquired and facilitated transactions for a lot of brands. And one thing that really stuck out to him through that process was you've got these solopreneurs, these founders that create these businesses. Maybe they have a broker on their side helping them. And then you've got somebody like Goldman Sachs, which is this this behemoth that all they do is buy companies, right? And there's kind of an information asymmetry gap there, where you got this guy on one hand that has all the knowledge, all the resources in the world, and then somebody else that doesn't. And so that view, and he felt like ultimately that wasn't very fair. And so that view really informed Unybrands and what Unybrands has become from day one, where ultimately, if you look at our ethos, which is buy, build, or boost, or if you kind of look at one of our taglines, which is fast, fair, and reliable, we want founders to finish dealing with us, whether we acquire their brand or not, to feel like they were treated fairly, to feel like the process moved quickly, and that Unybrands was a great partner for that. And ultimately, that all starts with the relationships that we build. And I think that's been something that's helped me, is being somebody that was a seller, being somebody that's exited. I'm always looking at it from a seller's point of view, and that's a voice. You can speak to my boss, you can speak to other members on our team. I'm always saying, like, let's not forget the sellers. Let's always make sure we're thinking about the sellers and viewing it from their perspective. And I think that's helped us. It's helped us break into some really kind of leading organizations and communities. That's helped us build really phenomenal relationships and build a Unybrands brand. So I think it all starts with that, is we're seller centric. They're our customer in a sense, and we want to ensure that in every interaction with us that they have, they feel like they were treated fairly. They feel like they were well taken care of. I think the other side of that answer for us is, really from day one, it's always been about quality over quantity. So I kind of alluded to this earlier. There's a lot of capital in the market last summer. There's a lot of people that were really excited to deploy the capital. We were certainly one of those. But I think our view from day one has been, let's be disciplined. Let's define what our criteria look like. There will be things that maybe fall outside of our criteria, and we'll take a look at it. We'll learn from it. But ultimately, let's make sure that we're disciplined in what we're acquiring, and that we're not getting out over our skis. And that's put us in a position today where, every day I'm asked questions about, are you guys still acquiring brands? What does the future look like for you? And I'm very proud to say, we're accelerating acquisitions. We're not pausing because we were so disciplined last year, and we continue to be.
When an e-commerce brand owner is thinking about selling, tell us a little bit about, how they can find you guys, and also when they should reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing I want to make sure I flag is it's never too early to reach out. Like I said, I'm a seller. I think something that's important to me is just paying it forward and ensuring that people feel like, they've learned as much as possible, even if you're not ready to exit for 6 months or a year from now. And so, you're always welcome to visit Unybrands, which is UNYBRANDS.com. To send us a note that way. You're more than welcome to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to chat. And we're not the right acquirer for everyone, but I think we've got a great network of people that we work with. That whether it's continue to scale your brand so that you're ready for exit, we're happy to connect you there. If it's maybe there's another partner that plays in the same space that you do, we're happy to connect you there as well.
All right. Korion Morris, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what's working in e-commerce.
Thank you so much, Egan. It was great to connect. Look forward to doing it again soon.